personally, I started taking K2 and A and vitamin D. Boom, my brain turned on and my lifelong depression was gone. We're targeting specific genetic variants and what you need to take so that the whole thing is balanced rather than you turning on a pathway and you're not sure what's going to happen. Paying attention to your body. When I eat this food, I don't feel good. Even vegetables. Some people feel terrible on vegetables. And so tuning back into your body and going, okay, I know it's supposed to be good for me, but I don't feel good when I eat it. And that's legitimate, to kind of pay attention to that.
Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of Wellness for Life. I'm your host, Niki Wolf, and today I'm excited to be joined by Dr. Ann Dunn. Dr. Dunn is the creator of Holistic Kinesiology and Holistic Methylation, and she has been practicing and teaching since 1988. She holds a Doctor of Chiropractic degree from Palmer College and is certified in multiple disciplines of kinesiology. She is also the founder of Holistic Methylation and My Happy Genes, Inc., a published author and an international lecturer on genetics and methylation. Today, we're going to be exploring how our genes influence our health and well-being and diving into genetics and epigenetics and discussing common genetic variants like MTHFR. Dr. Dunn, thank you so much for being here.
Oh, you bet. Hey, and by the way, my name is J, just the letter J. I know it's confusing for people sometimes because it's...
Perfect. Awesome.
Goes up as the letter, but yeah, that's my real first name. So.
I love it. Very cool.
Thanks for inviting me.
Absolutely. No, I'm excited. I think this is an important conversation. Some people know about it. I think it's like a lot of the biohackers start diving into epigenetics, but I think it's important that all individuals, if we are trying to better our health and well-being, that understanding epigenetics and just genetics in general is so valuable. But what I'd love is if you wouldn't mind sharing a little bit about your background and what led you into this field of genetics and epigenetics.
Yeah, absolutely. I am a natural healthcare practitioner. I've been practicing for over 36 years. And doing kinesiology, I don't know if you're familiar with muscle testing or applied kinesiology. Yeah. So I started out with that and then I became a chiropractor. I was practicing in Albuquerque, New Mexico for 36 years. And as time went on, I noticed that there were certain people that didn't respond to my usual treatments. I had a really successful practice. People were really getting well for the majority, in the majority of cases, but there were a few people where I just couldn't get anywhere with them. And I was one of those people too. And I knew that we were missing a piece of the puzzle. So I kept looking and I kept hearing this word methylation. And you're probably a little bit familiar with that. And we can unpack that one as we go. But, and I did kind of a deep dive into it and started to kind of tease it apart and realized that genetics was a big part of the puzzle that had not been looked at. And mainly because we didn't know how to look at it. We all know people where we go, oh, they have good genes because they can just get away with anything and they can smoke and drink and do all the bad things and nothing ever bothers them. So we knew, that genetics was a piece of the puzzle, but we didn't know how to address it. And it's a fairly new science. And so we're just now beginning to understand that we can identify genetic variants. And we did that through the Genome Project. Which gave us some, information about each separate gene and what they're involved with. But then how do we work with that? How do we use that information to inform, our diet, our lifestyle and supplementation, et cetera? That's a very new science. And so, I got pretty excited about it. I can go into more detail there, but that's kind of the rough draft of how that happened.
Absolutely. I mean, I think that makes the best practitioners is when we get excited and passionate about the work that we're doing and we just dive all in. So totally hear that. One thing that I like to do in my conversations is really lay that framework of, what we're talking about. I love exploring the science and understanding, but could you provide maybe a simple explanation, if this is possible, of genetics and epigenetics and how they affect our health?
Yeah, absolutely. So starting at the beginning, our genes are inside of our cell in the nucleus. If you remember back in grade school, even we learned about, the cell and the nucleus and the genes. And we have a set from each parent, 23 pairs of genes, one set from mom, one set from dad. And those are, they form your particular genetic code. There are variations from that. Not every sibling is going to have the exact same genes. We're all kind of different. So, but you inherited that code from your parents that tell your body how to do certain things. So our genes, that 23 sets of genes are basically a blueprint to tell your body how to make proteins, how to make enzymes, how to make your eyes blue or green or brown or whatever color they are. And actually our genetic code is about 99% the same between each person, humans. It's that 1% of what we call a variant that can inform our body and make us different and make us unique. And so that's really, that 1% is what we look at as far as like, how do our genes tell our body how to digest certain foods, how to detox properly, how to make neurotransmitters, how to make hormones correctly. So that's the area that I'm most interested in is that part of the biochemistry in our body that is, it's mandated basically by our genetics, if that makes sense.
Absolutely. And to clarify, when you say 23, is that 23 from mom and 23 from dad, or 23 total?
23 pairs. Yeah. So 46.
Okay.
46.
Perfect. And we talk about variants and how these would influence the way our body functions. How much control do we have over, our lifestyle and environment? Or I guess, how does epigenetics work in our favor?
That's a really good question. That's the big question. So when I started to dive into understanding the genes, I got my genes tested. I went to 23andMe and then plugged them into a website where it pulled out a certain set of genes. At that time, we were only looking at about 30 of them. And, you mentioned the MTHFR. Of course, a lot of people are real familiar with that one. And I'll tell you more about that in a minute. But for me, the one gene that kind of stuck out that I got what are called a homozygous variants in. So again, we have genes from mom, genes from dad. If that code is the correct code to tell our body what to do, then that system or that enzyme works generally, at 100%. If we have one of the genes from mom or dad that is the wrong code for that particular enzyme or protein, then it's going to reduce its activity by about 30%. But if both parents give you the wrong code for a particular enzyme like the MTHFR, et cetera, it's going to reduce the activity of that enzyme by about 70%. So the one particular gene variant that I got was the vitamin D receptor that I was homozygous for. So if you think about, I can't absorb vitamin D, I'm about 70% reduced in my ability to absorb vitamin D. And that's a big hit. If you know anything about natural health, you know that vitamin D is critical for a lot of processes in the body, not just bone building, but the immune system, for making neurotransmitters correctly, for activating our T cells so that they fight infections better. Just a lot of things depend on vitamin D in our body. And if I can only absorb about 30% of the vitamin D that I'm exposed to, then that's a big hit on our health. And as I started to look into the vitamin D receptor, what are the studies that have been done that, that increase the risk of certain diseases or imbalances in the body? One of the first things that came up was an increased risk of lung cancer when you smoke. Turns out my father died of lung cancer at 55, pretty early. And another thing, one of the other studies that they had done on that they found a higher risk for depression because vitamin D is critical for our brains making serotonin and dopamine, which are our main neurotransmitters for mood in the body. And then other studies that showed that, again, it's an assault on the immune system if you can't absorb vitamin D. It can lead to osteoporosis, a lot of things, immune system dysregulation, cancers, autoimmune conditions, all related to genetic variants in that vitamin D receptor. And so I went, oh, okay, a little scary. Sucks to be me, or can I work with that? And so I started to read more in the literature and found that that particular receptor had what are called cofactors, and those are nutrients. So vitamin K2 and vitamin A help that enzyme or that receptor open up so that D can get in. And so when I started taking K2 and A and vitamin D, boom, my brain turned on and my lifelong depression was gone. And so, again, I had been looking for answers for my own kind of health issues along with the patients that I was working with. But it was shocking to me that I suddenly felt happy, like for the first time in my life. I was like, I think this is happy. I had heard about it. And it wasn't because I had a bad childhood. It wasn't because I'd been through all this trauma. It was because my brain could not make neurotransmitters correctly. And so it was a huge paradigm shift for me to understand, okay, I may have inherited that gene, but I know how to biohack it. And so with the MTHFR that you mentioned earlier, that particular genetic variant tells our body how to convert folic acid into methylfolate, which is the active form of folic acid. If you can't convert folic acid into the active form, then, it greatly reduces your ability to use folic acid to make what are called methyl groups. And so that can lead to all kinds of health concerns as well. That was one of the first genes, again, that we had information about. So many studies that have been done on MTHFR genetic variants that can lead to cancer, to autism, for detoxification issues, et cetera. But so practitioners started to give people methylfolate. And if you can't activate folic acid to methylfolate, then let's give people methylfolate. And that it seemed like a good idea at the time, but turned out to be not such a good idea. So we can talk about that.
And why is that? Yeah, I'd love to.
Yeah. So when you turn on certain pathways in the body, and you do that through, if we give somebody methylfolate, we're actually turning on the methylation pathways. Certain things happen. The body starts to detox very quickly. It turns on, the release of heavy metals, chemicals, pesticides out of the body, which you may think is, okay, that's a really good thing, but it's very uncomfortable if you do it too fast. And so a lot of practitioners were giving people way too much methylfolate and not understanding what happens downstream from when you do that, when you turn on methylation. And my team of researchers in my clinic were doing experiments with this and found that, we were collecting the urine of patients when we methylated them through giving them methylfolate, and heavy metals were coming out just very rapidly. And so people were having headaches and nausea and fatigue, and they just felt lousy. I tried it too. I felt terrible. And I was like, okay, people aren't going to put up with this. Okay, maybe detoxing you, but it's way too strenuous. People aren't going to be happy with it. And so I was like, okay, well, maybe we need to look at downstream. What genetic variants do you have down there that keep you from detoxing correctly? Because there are genes further down that pathway. One of the other metabolites that you produce when you turn on methylation like that is sulfur. So if they've got a genetic variant in the SULT gene, their sulfurs go up and they start to get itchy or get this little tickly cough or get digestive issues. So it was really a matter of understanding sort of this broad view of biochemical pathways, what you're doing when you start tinkering with your particular genetic code. So I hope that wasn't too much. No,
there's so many great little nuggets to unpack there. And I can see how powerful and influential understanding your epigenetics are, because at the end of the day, there's certain things in our control and certain things out of your control. I've mentioned previously on the podcast, I have the double MTHFR mutation. That is out of my control. I always kind of believe like some of our circumstances or what your upbringing isn't your fault, but it's your responsibility to take action and move forward from that. And so when you look at your genetics, from my understanding, there's not much we can change as far as our genetics, but there's other holistic modalities, diet, lifestyle, supplementation that we do have in our control. And so understanding and knowing your specific genetic makeup, your, variants that are, involved in the body is so monumental to then figure out, okay, how can I best support my body and my health through diet, lifestyle, and supplementation? So I could see how this aspect of health is so crucial to understand. Now, So you mentioned the vitamin D, you mentioned MTHFR. I know from, and actually let me backtrack to the methylfolate. What I took away kind of from what you're saying is, and correct me if I'm wrong, that it's not necessarily that methylfolate is a problem. I actually think it's, it's more absorbable, but what's happening is if we are not getting the correct or informed information on how to go about it properly, all this other stuff can cascade. It's just like, if you do a cleanse and you just dive in and do the cleanse without doing all the other steps prior or without knowing in the information, you're obviously going to be hit with some detox symptoms that are a lot to handle, and not everybody wants to handle that. So would it be correct to say that the methylfolate isn't a problem to supplement with as long as you are getting correctly informed and educated about how to utilize it?
It is one gene out of many. We started to look at, okay, what other genes are equally as important? MTHFR has been readily studied, and it seems like it is the most important gene, but it really isn't. There are other genetic variants that are equally important to look at, and you have to look at the interaction of them. And that's the place where people aren't really doing the work to understand that. And as a consumer, it's a little bit daunting because, how am I going to put all this information together? But you can. And one of the things that I urge people to do is, like you've done, is educate yourself. Look at MTHFR and understand yourself a little better. We, find out why you are the way you are. And that's just one gene. And I'm going to talk about a few others that really can inform why you are the way you are. But I like to take it easy with that gene because that's the one that can create a lot of problems. Riboflavin is actually a cofactor for that particular enzyme, the methylene tetrahydrofolate reductase, which is the MTHFR. Is a riboflavin dependent enzyme. So I'd rather use riboflavin. It's a little less risky for people. So a little gentler if you're feeling like you really do need it. But there are a lot of other genes in the methylation pathway that could make it okay that you have even a homozygous MTHFR. They can make up for that fact. You're able to convert methylfolate through some other pathways.
Absolutely. And I can imagine diet. I mean, one way to avoid it is getting, your folate from actual food sources or some of these other cofactors like you mentioned. So we've spoken the vitamin D one, the MTHFR. You mentioned the sulfur one, SULT, if I recall. What are some of these other common genetic variants we should be, I guess, asking more questions about?
One of the other things that happens when you turn on methylation or you take methylfolate is a buildup of adrenaline if you have a genetic variant called the COMT. Maybe you're familiar with that one. A lot of people
haven't heard that one.
No? Oh, it's fun. COMT, that particular enzyme breaks down adrenaline, noradrenaline, and dopamine. And so if you can't break down adrenaline correctly, you can imagine what's going to happen. You're going to be in a state of anxiety. So somebody that takes methylfolate, they've just increased the production of adrenaline through that pathway. And they may go into anxiety with that one. COMT people are really interesting. They're very creative, very smart, thinking all the time. They're always going. They got to move. They usually, are a little bit hyper, but they're very interesting and usually very friendly and outgoing people, but they can't shut it down because their nervous system is in fight or flight mode, sympathetic dominance is what we call it, because they can't break down adrenaline. And so it makes them susceptible to insomnia, to anxiety disorders, to panic attacks, to PTSD risk. Another one that's one of my favorites is the MAO gene, and that one is the warrior gene, and that's the one that breaks down serotonin. So when you turn on methylfolate or the MTHFR gene, you're actually making more serotonin too. And a lot of people do report that their mood gets better when they start taking methylfolate, but it can also throw them into a state of irritability. So that warrior gene, the MAO, when serotonin goes too high, it makes them very irritable and angry and aggressive. That's why we call it the warrior gene.
Yeah.
And so that's why I say you got to understand what's happening downstream. So if we balance the COMT, the MAO, the SALT, the detox pathways. We get those going first. We balance those first. And often they're dependent on either a coenzyme or a cofactor. And those are just vitamins and minerals. So, but very specific. So the MAO is a B6 dependent enzyme. So if you're going to take methylfolate and you have a MAO, then you would take B6. So you can kind of see what we're doing is we're targeting specific genetic variants and what you need to take so that the whole thing is balanced rather than you turning on a pathway and you're not sure what's going to happen downstream. And so that was the big lesson. That was the big take home that we got as a team as we started to understand that you have to understand, the pathways and what's going to happen downstream, balance those first, and then move up to methylation.
Absolutely. And I think that's kind of the push that we're doing and why I think, functional medicine is so valuable, because I was just listening to an episode today where when we study the body, we can't just study one system. It all works together. And just to your point, we can't just focus on one thing. We really have to get down to the root cause, or just looking at because parts and functions in your toe can affect your brain and your finger, like it's all interconnected. And so it's so important. Yes. And again, that's why, I'm really trying to be effective and not just with myself, but to educate others and my children to ask more questions, to be critical thinkers, to think outside the box of what else should we be asking so that we can better understand this concept a little bit better. I'm curious if you found a correlation between, I want to say it was the COMT, COMT. Is it T as in like Tony?
Yes.
I don't know if that's the
T as in
whatever it's called. I know I've always butchered those, but so the CMT. Have you found a correlation between individuals with like ADHD, ADD who have had this mutation? Okay,
absolutely, 100%. Yeah, and so to speak to what can people do, and that first step is educating yourself. Understanding why you are the way you are, and through genetics, it's fascinating because a gene like that, it can lead to ADHD or ADD. And we tend to beat ourselves up about it. Why can't I just focus? Why can't I just relax? Why can't I calm down? What does the matter with me? And we blame ourselves. And, I did too, because as somebody who suffered from depression most of my life, I was like, what is the matter with me? Why can't I just be happy? And I'd listen to Wayne Dyer, I'd listen to Tony Robbins, and I could be for a minute, I could be happy. And then I just, my set point was down here. And once I understood the genetic variants I had, I went, oh, wow, it wasn't my fault, that there's a biochemical reason for what I'm going through. And that's not to dismiss, traumas and things that can happen and real reasons for depression. But for me and for a lot of people, the underlying biochemistry is a huge part of the problem. And so for people who are real irritable and they have a hair trigger temper and they think, well, why can't I just be nice? Why can't I just be a chill person? And again, we beat ourselves up. And so if you can start to understand, my genes are doing it. I get it. Now what can I do? And there are diet and lifestyle choices that are going to upregulate that enzyme or downregulate that enzyme. And so for the COMT, green tea actually inhibits it. It's going to make it worse. So I know a lot of people drink green tea because they think it's full of antioxidants, and it is. But for a COMT variant, it's going to make it worse, and it's going to make them more anxious and more difficulty paying attention. And
and I want to interject too, because I think this is an important thing that I know I've done this in the past, where we hear one little thing that we want to attach to ourselves and be like, okay, now I'm going to make this change. Now I'm going to make this.
Yeah.
I would encourage, go get tested, go find out your genetics, because maybe you struggle with attention and you're like, okay, now I need to stop green tea. That very well could be the case, but it also could be you live a highly stimulated life and you don't know how to live without stimulation. You might not have the COMT mutation. You very well might, but I think let's figure out what our body has so that we can best support it. But gosh, I can just see how powerful and influential understanding your genetic makeup can be, especially if you struggled with depression, anxiety, or some of these, attention issues, that if now I understand, and whether you put blame on yourself or not blame, regardless, when you can understand your body better, we can now move forward on how we can support it. And like you said, through diet, through these cofactors, through supplementation, connecting the diet, how would our genes help us determine the best diet or nutrition plan? Are there specific genes that tell us what foods might work best for us?
Yes, absolutely. Yeah. And we test for about 600 particular genes, and some of them will, kind of inform your body how to best digest fats or proteins or carbohydrates. So that's the big macromolecules, right? But also, let's say you have a TPH gene, and that is the tryptophan hydroxylase, and its job is to turn tryptophan into serotonin. But if you have a genetic variant there, then eating foods without tryptophan is a better idea, because you can't process tryptophan down into serotonin, and it's going to be made into some metabolites that are hard on your central nervous system. And so in that
I want to
case,
cut you off for 1 second. Sorry about that. So my understanding, and this is kind of like shocking my brain a little bit, that if you have the genetic variant, that, okay, through supplementation, or if you have the ingredient that you're not getting in the best form, your body just doesn't convert it. But you're saying even getting it from foods, our body is not utilizing it and converting it into that usable form.
Correct. Yes. Yeah. It works both ways, not just with supplements, but with foods too.
Yeah.
And so and turmeric is another good example. If you have that MAO gene that I mentioned, the warrior gene, it's going to inhibit that one as well. And so turmeric will make people who are already irritable more irritable. So it's fascinating. So with, when I talk to people about, okay, how do you approach this? The first one is get your genes tested and understand why you are the way you are. And that's going to give you a lot of compassion for probably what you've been dealing with and your personality. I want to talk more about that too. But and then the second step is looking at your diet. How is your diet causing your genes to go the wrong way? And, we're so used to like, oh, we read an article about turmeric and everybody should take it because it's anti-inflammatory, thinking that we're one size fits all, and we are not. That paying attention to your body. When I eat this food, I don't feel good. Even vegetables, some people feel terrible on vegetables. And so tuning back into your body and going, okay, I know it's supposed to be good for me, but I don't feel good when I eat it. And that's legitimate, to kind of pay attention to that. But also, the gene reports can tell you, okay, these food categories are not your best. You may be able to handle some of it, but if you start to do too much of it, it's going to throw your physiology off. And so that's important. And then
go for it. Sorry.
The last step would be supplementation. So if you can't do it with diet and lifestyle, and like you say, settling down and focusing and relaxing and meditating, those are important things too. And then supplementation is the last sort of step in that to kind of really tweak. This is biohacking at its finest, down at the cellular level, down at the genetic level,
Absolutely. For those common genetic variants that you laid out, would you be able to kind of walk us through maybe one food that could make this problem worse and one food that could support us? I don't know if that's a possibility.
Yeah. So the MAO that we talked about is, turmeric, again, is the classic example. Ayahuasca is another one that slows down the MAO gene. And the things that upregulate it are things with B6 in it. So,
okay.
Foods that have high levels of the Bs would upregulate that.
Great.
Bees are, and then, the bees are going to upregulate a lot of different things, but that particular one would be upregulated by B vitamins. So,
fantastic.
Does that make some sense?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think a lot of organ meats are very nutrient rich, not just B vitamins, but I think have a lot of nutrients that, and shellfish I've heard too, which, fortunately aren't the most appealing for most individuals. Mm-hmm. And that's where supplements come into handy, like to get a really good high quality beef liver or something like that. So we've spoke a little bit about diet. I'd love to kind of transition into, you briefly mentioned lifestyle, meditation, exercise. What other kind of, lifestyle contributors can we utilize to support our body if we do have these mutations?
Good question. So there was a particular genetic variant called the BDNF, the brain-derived neurotropic factor. If you have a genetic variant there, high risk of Alzheimer's. Mm-hmm. And so it's kind of in the spotlight lately because people are concerned about, the possibility of some dementia as they age. But there are 3 really simple things you can do, and they're probably good for everybody. But one is cold showers stimulate BDNF production, and then intermittent fasting, which is generally for most people, though not all. There are certain genetic variants where they're not going to do well on intermittent fasting. And then high intensity interval training can modify, just those 3 lifestyle things can modify that particular genetic variant and reduce the risk of Alzheimer's significantly. So good research on those. There's some good studies.
Absolutely. One of our partners, so we have Life Seasons, but we have another brand, NeuroQ, and Dr. Dale Bredesen, who's one of the leading neurologists in Alzheimer's. He formulated these cognitive supports, and he's one of the first doctors who's not only slowed the progression of Alzheimer's, he's reversed it. And he developed a formulation. There's coffee fruit extract in there, which helps support BDNF. And I think to your point, and I think he has a protocol as well where there's intermittent fasting. He has this keto flex, diet approach, Again, this is why it's so important to understand your body, your makeup, because intermittent fasting or keto might not be best suited for you, but to figure out what your makeup is. And especially if you know there's Alzheimer's in the family, that's a pretty good indication that this might be something that you struggle with. And so how can we tweak and modify our lifestyle to support our body? So fantastic. Supplements. We've spoken a bit about B vitamins. What other kind of supplements come to mind to support your these genetic variants?
Good question. And I want to make a point too about, some people will say, well, I just need to go out and take a multiple vitamin. And it may sound like it makes sense to you, but it's going to have things in there that are going to drive some of your genetic variants the wrong direction. So, and for some people getting too much B6, they're going to overload their detox pathways. They're going to overload their sulfur transferase pathways. And so getting those right amounts of nutrients, kind of dialing them in exactly for you is what we're trying to do. And that's when you get that fantastic, biohacking, sort of the symphony of the body, I call it, when all systems are working correctly. When your brain's working correctly and you have optimal energy, you sleep well, you're going to the bathroom well, your digestive system works well, everything is top notch. That requires very precision supplementation. So there's a genetic variant called, it's one of my favorites because of the name, but it's called the NDUFS, NDUFS. And it blocks the Krebs cycle, which is where we make energy out of our food. It's where we turn glucose into ATP, the basic unit of energy in the body. And it can block that. So if you have a genetic variant there, you can be 70% reduced in your ability to turn food into energy, which you can only imagine is going to lead to fatigue and weight gain and cardiovascular disease and insulin resistance. So it's a biggie.
But and can you repeat, what was it? Clufus, doofus? What was it again?
NDUFS, the NDUFS gene.
NDUFS. Okay. Great. And, I could see that one be big.
Yeah, it is. And when we think about these particular genetic variants, we go, oh, wow, that sucks. Is that a mutation? How did that happen? Why would that be in our gene pool? And, if we look back, our ancestors, those people that were able to slow down their metabolism were the ones that survived during times of famine. And so, we've inherited these genes from our ancestors. And so, those people that have great difficulty losing weight or having the energy to exercise, they're feeling it, and it's not uncommon. We're 60% obese in this country, something like that. Mm-hmm. When we have the ability to have any food we want at any time, and we have those genes where we can't use that food as a fuel, essentially, then that's a recipe for disaster for most people. Although we probably all know people who can eat anything they want and never gain an ounce. And we don't like them very much. No, I'm kidding.
No, but I can imagine that there's a lot of other internal things going on.
Sure.
When you see, they call it what, skinny fat people, or, there's some other stuff that's obviously not obvious to the eye. One question I have for you because I've worked in the supplement industry, 12 years now. And I would think I'm somewhat educated on this. And when I found out about the MTHFR mutation, I was like, okay, we need to get away from folic acid. But based on this conversation, one, I don't think, again, correct me, I'm going to lay it all out. Correct me if I'm wrong. I still don't think we should be taking folic acid if we have the mutation. And so I was thinking, okay, folate or methylfolate, but you're kind of voicing some concerns around that. And then you mentioned riboflavin. So if we do have the mutation, should we be looking at other cofactors instead of the methylated form of whatever that ingredient is? Is that the best way to support the body?
I would absolutely say it is, and only through clinical research, in my clinic and through watching patients go through misery when they were taking methylfolate. When they started taking riboflavin, they had a much easier experience of it. And it's more clean. It's a better way to let your body, sort of upregulate that enzyme instead of jumping over it and giving you the methylated form of folic acid. You're 100% right. Avoiding folate or folic acid. And it's in every food, every processed food out there.
And doctors still prescribe it.
Oh my God. Yeah. It's crazy. And I would say, listen to your body too, because if you get too much, if you turn on your methylfolate production too strong, you're going to get headaches and you're going to feel terrible. And you may not realize that it's from the supplementation, and that can really happen. I've just seen it over and over again.
Okay. So another question. This is going to go a weird way, but when I go get massages, I want deep tissue. I want to feel the pain. I'm okay with crying because I know it's doing the work. The reason I mention that is when I think about what you just said. Okay, well, let me take the methylfolate. I'm okay with the headaches and all this stuff if it's doing the job and getting stuff out. If you can if you can handle that though, are you saying it's more of an uncomfortability or it's actually creating harm if we were to do that?
It's actually creating harm. Your liver and your kidneys are struggling. They can't get the toxins out. So it's going to build up in your body and create damage. It's your body telling you, when you detox, when we turn on detox, it should be comfortable. It should be at a level that it's always running. You don't want toxins to build up and create, a huge problem. And then, we're going to dump it and we're going to feel terrible. I used to do that. Certain people have genetic variants where they don't detox well. And so we'd have to put them on a detox program. I'm a functional medicine practitioner. Is what I did, for years.
Yeah.
Right. We're going to do a detox program. And they all felt terrible and they all had headaches and they all ugh. And then when I started to understand that your body should be detoxing all the time, because guess what? Mm-hmm. You're exposed to toxins every minute of every day on this planet. So you don't want them to build up in your tissues and create damage. And so if you can turn on your detox pathways gently so that they're always running at a very safe level, that's where the juice is.
Yeah, that sounds like where the sweet spot is. I guess the devil's advocate kind of part of me is we are now just in a slew of toxins. Even if you try to do the best and you glass Tupperware and you clean makeup and all that stuff, we're bombarded. And so I can imagine 20, 30, 40 years ago that we could naturally turn on these detox pathways. It's relatively smooth. But even if you're eating biodynamic organic food, we are so bombarded with the amount of toxins. And I'm not trying to do pushback. I'm just trying to think realistically. Even if you're doing all the steps, I can imagine there's such an abundance of toxins that it's not going to be a pleasant process. I can see how we need to support our body, especially with, we're just finishing a series on gut health right now, and how regular bowel movements are so important to eliminate sweating. All this stuff is to get it out of our system is so important. And if we can, poop on a regular basis, that seems like it's a form of gentle detoxification. But I don't know. With the slew of just toxins, environmentals, and endocrine disruptors in our environment. I don't know. It almost seems, and I'm not trying to take a negative approach, but it almost just seems very challenging for it just to be that easy.
It isn't that easy, but it is simple.
Simple, yeah.
It is. If the body has an amazing ability to be well. I mean, people are living into their hundreds, and we were exposed to chemicals and toxins and pesticides and heavy metals and radioactivity and electromagnetic fields. Our bodies are incredibly resilient, especially the liver. But if you give the liver what it needs to do its job, it can do it gently. There doesn't have to be pain involved. I'm 100% sure of that.
And really quick to piggyback on that, what are some of those key components that we can give our liver to do its job?
One of them is molybdenum that actually helps the sulfur pathway clear out. So if you're turning on methylation and it's flowing down that pathway, molybdenum opens up the sulfur transferase enzyme and gets it out of the body.
Is that a vitamin, mineral, food?
It's a mineral. Yeah. You know about phase 1 and phase 2 detox in the body?
I know about it. I'm not well versed in it.
Well, the cytochrome P450 enzymes are phase 1. So when our body takes in a toxin that's like oil soluble, it needs to turn that oil soluble toxin into a water soluble toxin. And that's what we call phase 1. In that process, it actually makes a toxin that is more toxic than the substance that you started with, which is a problem if you can't go through phase 2. Phase 2 takes that water soluble toxin, turns it into an inert substance, and then it's eliminated in the kidneys and liver and skin, et cetera. Phase 1 is the cytochrome P450s run on the B vitamins, actually, the methylation. So if you're not methylating, then you're probably not detoxing well. So getting methylation going, at least in that category, is going to be good. But if your phase 2 is stuck, then you've created a bunch of toxins that are more toxic than what you started with. And there's another piece of the danger with methylating if you don't understand what happens downstream. So the phase 2 runs on amino acids. So there are, glucuronidation, sulfation is phase 2, and acetylation, and but those run on like cysteine, N-acetylcysteine, or glutathione. The production of glutathione is there. Selenium is important for the heavy metal part. There's a particular enzyme that helps move heavy metals out of the body. So that's phase 2. So there are more nutrients down there, but those are the main one. Those are the main categories: the methylation for phase 1, and then amino acids for phase 2. So those people that are vegetarian, that aren't getting enough proteins, can really be inhibiting their phase 2 detoxification capacity to get those toxins out of the body. So
yeah, I think that was super helpful understanding those key contributing factors. And I think that's the beauty of holistic well-being, is that we can pull from diet, lifestyle, supplementation, but ultimately knowing what's going on in your body is going to be the best approach to start. Jay, this has been incredible. I think so much information, hopefully some really good takeaways for our listeners. Is there any kind of final advice for somebody looking to start their journey in understanding their genetic health?
Yeah, and getting your genes tested. I have a company called My Happy Genes. It's not the only one out there. There are a lot of them. One thing that we're very adamant about is privacy. We don't know who you are when you sign up for an account. The lab never knows who you are. They don't have any data about you. And we look at the genes in this way in understanding the biochemical pathways. With us, it's never one gene, one supplement. It isn't MTHFR and methylfolate. And that's where a lot of companies are kind of doing that. So, it's a little different, but the take home is, once you get your genes tested and start to look at you, just having compassion for yourself and for your parents and other people in your life, maybe in a way that you've never thought about it. And it's really an amazing thing to think about people in terms of, oh, wow, they were dealing with these genetic variants that can change your brain chemistry and cause them to be irritable or grouchy or gain weight and not be able to lose it. And, so if we can go, wow, I wonder if they have that gene, or wow, it wasn't my fault, that I was that way. It is my genetic code. But then, educating yourself, and you've already done that, in your life, Niki, but And I think people are more capable of that than they think they are. It may sound complicated, but if you just start small, look at one gene and start studying it and go, oh, wow, look what it does. And that's where I started too. I had to kind of start over. Even though I was a doctor, I had to start at the beginning with genetics, and we weren't taught that in school. But just that. And so hopefully it'll give you more compassion for yourself. I call it genetic compassion.
I love that approach. And I think also this information wasn't as accessible to our parents. And so to look at it of like, they didn't have the ability to, from my understanding, to access this information and understand and, better approach their health and well-being. And so to look, give them more compassion of the things that they went through. And now we have, this information readily available. I think it's an incredible thing. Where can people find, I know you mentioned your company, but if you can list the website or socials, where can people find more information about you, or even if they wanted to go get tested? Yeah.
So it's My Happy Genes. You can do it as all one word. And I have lots of videos too on YouTube. If you want to learn a little bit more, and kind of deep dive into this before you get your genes tested to sort of understand it, there's that possibility too. So, and then for your listeners, I created a code called WELL50, WELL 50, and that'll give you $50 off the testing if you use that code on the site.
Incredible. So generous. I hope our listeners take advantage of that. I think it is, this conversation has showed me how impactful it is. And it kind of makes me want to get retested, because the only one that really stood out was the MTHFR. And I don't even remember if I did a deep dive, but it sounds like yours is laid out different. And I work with naturopaths and functional doctors, but to be able to look at all the other components and then kind of go downward of what else should we be looking at and how can we best support our body? Just so influential on how you live, feel, breathe. One last thing that I'm actually thinking about, and you mentioned personality. Because you said, when we know our body, you have a little tagline or a slogan or something, but how does understanding epigenetics affect our personality?
So it's so fun, because when I look at a genetic report, I can tell people, what they're like. I'll go, wow, you likely didn't do well in school, but you're super smart. You probably couldn't focus enough to, get good grades, but you were like way ahead of the pack. And they're like, yeah. Or entrepreneurial. There's an entrepreneurial gene for people who they're always thinking of a better way to do things. And often they'll start businesses, serial entrepreneurs, or novelty seeking genes. Those people that always have to have something new, going on. Or the oxytocin genes, the people that are like really high in empathy versus those people that have zero empathy. There's a scale there. So it's fascinating to see. And I can really tell people this is what you're experiencing in your life. And they're like, whoa, how do you know that?
So are you saying fortune tellers and palm readers are probably epigenetics as well?
Maybe so, experts. Or maybe I thought maybe I'd create a dating site would be cool. Like,
totally, to make those matches, or I guess to figure out which would go well with each other. Oh, right. Very cool. Yeah. Well, thank you so much for sharing your insights and just knowledge today. This was a value and an asset for myself, and again, I hope it was for our listeners. I'll make sure to include all your contact information and the code that you have available as well. And can you repeat the code one more time?
WELL 50.
50. Perfect. Fantastic. Well, thank you again, Dr. J. I appreciate your time today.
Yeah, thanks, Niki. I appreciate the invitation.